Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining another segment of A Voice from the Margins. Well, it's been a very busy week, as always, but probably even more busy this week than other weeks. We have a lot of things going on, a lot of things happening, a lot of things related to the Green Party, a lot of things related to the country as a whole.
Oh,
So, just wanted to let everybody know that we have a very good show tonight. Very important guest with us, Brother Bruce Dixon, who is a longtime green activist. He is the managing editor with the Black Agenda Report. And we're going to discuss a very important topic. We're going to talk about Green Party development for 2018 and beyond. So, welcome to the show, Bruce Dixon.
hey, thanks for inviting me, Ajamu.
Glad that you're here. But Bruce, before we get into this conversation around the Green Party, I mean, there's so many things happening right now. And one major development that we have to talk about for at least a few minutes is what appears to be the real possibility of a U.S. attack on Syria. What do you think about this, and what should be the Green Party position on this possible attack?
Well, the first thing to know is that there would not be a Syrian civil war if it were not for the relentless bipartisan policy on the part of the United States that they're going to overthrow the Saddam, that they're going to overthrow that regime in Syria. Syria, Venezuela, Iraq, North Korea, Cuba, and I think one other regime were on the list of to be overthrown when Bush II came into office. And that's pretty much, and that document was part of the Project for a New American Century, people who did a lot of the planning for the Bush II administration. But that is an aspect of what the Republicans were doing in that era, which is bipartisan. There's a bipartisan policy of regime change in Syria. And if the United States had not allowed or told Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to let its network of jihadis and send them in there, pretend that they were aiding the so-called moderate Syrians, if they could find any, then there wouldn't be a third of a million dead Syrians. There wouldn't be a million Syrian refugees if it were not for U.S. interference in that war. And
Well,
some of the
but Bruce,
bipartisan.
but now we have a reality on the ground. Now we saw these horrific pictures of these kids who were grasping for air, and now we have this drumbeat for intervention. What
Well, the
now
pictures
then
of the
should
kids,
what should be
the
the
pictures of
position
the
of the Green
kids,
Party on this?
the position of the Green Party is that the pictures of those kids are only in so-called rebel-held areas, the areas held by Uncle Sam's allies, and they make up a very small portion of Syria. The last time this gas attack stuff came up, it turned out that the gas was not shot by the Syrian regime at the rebels. It turned out that the rebels had acquired the machinery to make this gas from the United States allies, including Turkey, and they were mishandling it. And it went off in their own zone, and then they blamed the Assad regime. So we've got to be really careful about that stuff. And there's a bipartisan drumbeat for war in Syria. There always has been. And Barack Obama, one of the few good things I can say about the Obama years is that he resisted going in there any worse than he did. There was a moment when it looked like they were about to push Obama into bombing Syria, and he somehow grew a pair for a moment and didn't do that. We should only hope that Mr. Trump can also grow a pair and resist that urge.
So, Bruce, again, what then do you think should be the political position of the Green Party on this
We
pending
need to
attack?
strengthen. We need an arms embargo of that entire region and of the whole African continent as well. We need to reach out to Syrian civil society, okay, which instead of reaching out to our so-called moderates, which are really jihadis, we need to reach out to Syrian civil society, and we need to back off on our threats, and if and back off on our fleet that is off Syrian waters. We need to back off. We need an arms embargo, and we need to get rid of our policy of regime change in that region.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll probably end up coming back to that. I'm sure there may be some questions coming from our listeners and our viewers in a few minutes.
No doubt.
So, as we talked about, Bruce, the first part of this show, we have a conversation among ourselves, and then we turn it over to our viewers. So, you have been a very active member of the Green Party. You have some very clear views in terms of what needs to be done for the party to develop and for the party to be ready and competitive in 2018. Share with our viewers some of your views on what the party needs to do to prepare itself for 2018.
Well, right now the Green Party is too weak to compete with the capitalist parties, and we're too weak to compete with the capitalist parties because we are aping their model. The capitalist parties depend on the donations of the 1% to function, and then they depend upon the media that belongs to the 1% to function. And so they don't need members. There's no place where you as a Democrat can go to affect policy, to debate policy and to affect policy, where leading Democrats who are in charge of your party have to listen to you. And so we are aping that same model, only the Green Party does not have 1%er funding and does not have the kind of free media that the two parties get. So what we've got to do is we've got to pull ourselves out of that, and we've instead got to ape a different model, the successful model that's been done in perhaps 100 countries around the world, of having a member-financed party, a party that is based on membership dues, and a party that defines itself as being responsible to its dues-paying members, a party whose officers are directly responsible and can be recalled by its dues-paying members, a party whose candidates are also accountable to its dues-paying membership. That's the party that we need to build. And
now, Bruce, your proposal you are raising, you've been raising for quite some time now. What's been and it seems logical, what's been the pushback within the party to this kind of development?
Well, the pushback is on several levels. Some people don't believe. Well, let's start with where we're at in Georgia. Okay, in Georgia, we just passed a requirement on the state level that party members are going to have to pay $10 a month dues, and the party membership, the state committee that's going to be elected in July in Georgia is going to be elected by the dues-paying members. So you're going to have to be a dues-paying member to do that. And the deal is that if your party is not responsible to some defined bunch of people, then that means your leaders are just floating out there in space. And if one of the reasons we want to collect dues is because we want to define our membership. People with a little skin in the game, $10 a month isn't much, but people with a little skin in the game have to be our membership. And if your officers are not responsible to a defined bunch of members, then who indeed are they responsible to? Right now, many state level Green parties don't have dues paying memberships. And so then, the question is, who elected those officers? Who are those officers responsible to? How can you have internal democracy inside your organization if you cannot define who your members are and who your officers are responsible to. You can't. So those are the internal reasons that we have to do it. Now, the external reasons we have to do it are that we have, without financing from dues-paying members, we cannot hire staff. We cannot do the things that a party is supposed to do. Georgia has 12 million people, okay? Perhaps 6 million of those are eligible to vote or registered voters. So if you're going, and Georgia has, I think, 112 or 120 counties. How are you going to have branches in maybe half those counties? How are you going to have a membership of 40, 50, 60,000 people and maintain those lines of communication, put out mailings to them, emailings to them twice a week, put out other kinds of alerts without a paid staff? You absolutely cannot do it. And the only place that the money for that paid staff can come from and still have the party be accountable to its members is the members themselves, period.
Well, you've laid out some very serious structural challenges for the party. What else does a party need to do in order to strengthen itself beyond the fact that it needs those resources? What other kind of structural or political changes need to take place in order for the party to be more competitive on the local levels and in national campaigns?
Well, we're finding that this dues-paying membership thing is really, really, really hard for a lot of Greens, current Greens, or people who call themselves Greens, to grasp. And it's also really hard for a number of people in the movement, period, to grasp, because they're so used to the movement being owned and operated by nonprofits and by churches for as long as I can remember. The word has been, you want to do good in the world, then what you want to do is you want to volunteer for a nonprofit organization, you want to work for a nonprofit organization, you want to start a nonprofit organization. Those are your three options, you see? And it happens that thanks to that, nonprofit organizations own and run our movement, okay? They're the only ones who can hire organizers to do anything. They're the only ones that can mount virtual phone banks. They're the only ones that have the resources, that have places to hold meetings. We don't even have places, the Green Party in big cities like Atlanta or Chicago doesn't even have a single room that it owns where it can hold meetings. So these are elementary things that the Democratic Party doesn't have to worry about. And they're elementary things that the Republican Party doesn't have to worry about, because their contact with members is through TV.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
You look at CNN if you're a Democrat to find out what you believe. You look at Fox if you're a Republican to find out what your marching orders for this week are. If we want to build a party where people in their own towns, in their own part of town, if you're in a big city like Atlanta or Chicago or New York, can come together and decide what their beliefs are and what their policies are and what candidates they're going to back, we're going to have our own spaces. We're going to have our own staff, and we're going to have to step up. And you can't do everything with volunteers. It's just
exactly. So let's go to the viewing audience. And so so folks who have questions, please send Bruce your questions, and we'll begin to address those questions. This issue of how we explain, how we address the party, how we strengthen the party is very important, of course. Greg Bartik is raising the question, though. What might be the self-criticism for the party for the poor electoral showing in this last campaign? Is it just the resources? How do we explain that we only got about 1% of the vote? Are there political issues, or the structural ones, or a combination of both? And what can we look at critically for the party to try to address those issues?
There's issues all over the place. Like I said, in some states, the Green Party is little more than a bunch of aging hippies squatting on a flag. Seriously. And we've also got the issue. I mean, for instance, the Jill Stein campaign raised and spent, I think, $3.5 million, during the campaign season. That is probably 10 times what all the state Green parties together raised and spent, all of them together. So this is what we have right now. What we have right now is a blanket full of holes. What we have right now is as good as you're going to get from a situation where anybody's agreeing who says so, anybody who's is an officer who says so, and this is as good as you're going to get with no professional staff and no paid staff on the state level, and no membership, no active membership directing that staff. This is
How
what
do
you're
you
going to
how do
get.
you respond though, Bruce, to to an argument that says that while paid staff is important, the real challenge is that in many of these states there is a lack of organization. That is, if you have tighter organization, you can better coordinate volunteers, and you could take advantage of the fact that we had thousands of voters in various states and put in place a plan to try to tap into and to bring those voters closer to the party or bring those voters into the party. So how do we deal with that critique that is not just about the resource issue, but is about other non-material elements that can explain why the party has not been growing the way it potentially could?
You can't say it's yeah, somebody. What my camera is? Okay, is it righted now? Yeah. See, somebody was making an incoming call to me on a Facebook call. That's what did that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the issues that I named are very real issues. Okay, and the existence of other issues does not make them less real. Like I said, there are issues all over the place. And building a mass-based party of the left is something that's simply never been done in 100 years in the United States. And that process is going to be full of fits and starts. But like I said, there's, while the Stein campaign itself, which I was a part of, I was a paid staffer in the Stein campaign for a while, not the whole run, but a lot of it. And, professionalism on their part, to the extent that they had it, couldn't make up for the lack of organization on the local and state level. It just could not. And the Stein campaign itself made many internal mistakes of its own, like, for instance, not choosing to be competitive in North Carolina or Indiana. I think they originally chose not to be competitive in Georgia. And then they reconsidered at the last minute when it was a little late, and they wound up still not being on the ballot in those states. So there's enough blame to go around. There's enough causes to go around. What is really for certain, though, is that we're not going to get any better until we become a membership-driven organization. And there's no way to become a mass membership-driven organization unless you are collecting dues from folks and providing them with services that they think are worth paying those dues.
So now, Bruce, we have a very interesting question from Brian Sessler, who says that, look, when we had staff in Oregon, they ended up frustrated by all the infighting that happened when some members thought they should be doing A and others thought they should be doing B. How do we address that kind of issue?
Well, I imagine you have to. I imagine you have to have a state organizing plan, and I imagine that your staff would be responsible for creating that plan. I don't know what the situation was in Oregon. I don't know who was directing that staff there, so I can't make any judgments that are particular to that situation because I'm not close enough to it.
Is that
But
an issue
of
though?
course, if you've
Then
got
is that an
staff, you've got to
issue?
have a plan.
Yes. So you're suggesting that basically that kind of problem could crop up in any state if you don't have a strong organizational staff. I mean, organizational plan, and
If your
uh,
members who are directing the staff do not have a plan, I mean, if we hire a staff and we've got the staff and leading members who are committed to a plan, and then 2 weeks later they decide to commit to a different plan, and then direct the staff to go a different way, then that's just crazy. But like I said, I wasn't close to Oregon. I imagine something like that could happen
mhm.
anywhere, and it's just the duty of those down on the ground to see that it doesn't.
Now, Bruce, what about the argument that we've heard in opposition to this notion of a dues-paying party? That when you request dues from individuals, that there is automatically a discriminatory element. That is, that there are some people who may not be able to afford dues, and therefore, if they can't pay the dues, then their ability to participate might be limited. How do you deal with that pushback question?
The first time I heard that raised was probably the summer of 2015 when they had the Left Elect conference in Chicago, and we were talking to Kashama Sawant and some of the people around her, and they said that they dealt with this problem in their campaigns, that there were a few homeless people who insisted on donating what to them were substantial sums, three figures, and there was debate. Wow, these people are homeless. Can we accept $100 from them? And the answer was, yeah, we can, because it's their money and they think this is worth it. If it's their money and they think this is worth it, then you are denying them agency to work for their freedom and for their liberation. Um, um, $10 a month is not much. I've been poor before, and I could afford $10 to do. I mean, I can afford to throw away $10 here and there. There's almost no such thing as a person who can't get a hold of $10 if they really want to. If they have to ask someone else for $10 this month that they can pay back next month. On the other hand, you don't want a bunch of people in your party who only paid $2 for membership, because we're Americans. We believe that what we get for free isn't worth much, you know, and
Mhm.
so there has to be some skin in the game here that people have to be willing to commit to, and the mindset of party members and party leaders has to be that we are in competition for that $10 with for that dues money with everything else that a poor person has to spend, and so we need to make party membership worth it. Okay, we
So are you
need to do
suggesting,
stuff,
Bill?
and we need to have activities that make party membership worth it.
Okay. Are you suggesting, Bruce, that there will be no circumstances in which a potential party member uh, could be allowed to avoid dues paying? Are there mechanisms to address those kinds of individuals?
I think that that's something that is going to be decided on a local level. And
Mhm.
I think people will find a way to make exceptions when they have to. One of the
You mean
things
you
that
mean
we'll
something
probably
you mean
do,
something like a dues waiver form or something?
um, I mean, something like if you can't pay $10, then some of us, see if you can find somebody else who's agreeing, who can vouch for your $10 this month and the next 2 months, and then 3 months from now we'll revisit this again. You know, I mean that would be my preference for how we would do it in Georgia, but
Mhm.
I'm not trying to say how they should do it in Oregon or Utah or anywhere else. I can only speak for the way we're trying to do this in Georgia. We do think that it's important not to waive dues, not to waive dues, because if you waive dues, then you've got party officials who are responsible to a bunch of people who don't think party membership is worth it, who don't think party membership is worth $10 a month. You know, I mean, I've heard from people who said, well, $10 is too much. What about $5? Well, you know what? You know, at some point there has to be a question. People who don't believe party membership is worth very much aren't going to be probably aren't going to bother to be very active in this party. I mean, I've been in rooms, and so have you, Ajamu, where poor people have raised lots of money. They're called churches, aren't they? You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, do poor people go to church on Sunday and get a waiver? Okay? They do not. Okay?
Yeah.
If they're part of a church community, then they're proud to come up with that $10. Okay?
Yeah.
They're proud to do it. So if we're serving the people, if our parties are actually serving the people and saying and doing what they're supposed to do, people will be glad to give us that $10 and more.
Bruce, in our last few, I think you're absolutely right. In our last few minutes, Bruce, let's move then to some sort of non-structural kinds of questions and look at some political issues that parties are facing as they're trying to develop. Issues like, how do you increase the visibility of the party? Should one use, for example, Nathan says that Green Party activists should use things like Green Party town hall conferences to raise issues and to engage the public. Luann from Michigan says, well, what about a situation where you have a party member, you have a person who's running for or wants to run as a candidate on the party platform, who says that he does not agree with feminism, as stated in the platform. The Green Party platform says that there is no male privilege, no white privilege, and no cis privilege. You know, how does the state deal with someone like that who presents themselves and gets endorsed as a candidate? These are some of the I guess real issues that parties are facing around this country as they're trying to identify candidates, train candidates, and support them in their races.
Well, this is why you need a dues-paying membership, so that your and you need for your candidates to arise out of your active dues-paying locals. Since the Green Party has followed this tradition of self-appointed volunteer activists doing everything, you don't really know sometimes who you're working with, and there's been an attraction to say, oh, well, we'll build the Green Party by getting with this guy who we know is running, you know, and so out of weakness, Greens have reached out to other folks who don't necessarily share their values. And if you've got that kind of a situation, then that's what weakness invites you to do. It invites you to reach out to folks with other values and say, well, maybe if I put my green values in the back seat, maybe if I put my opposition to capitalism in the back seat, I just won't mention the word capitalism. And that's not how you build a mass-based party of the left. The way you build.
Let me raise a question, follow up to that comment. I think you're absolutely correct. And before I ask that question, though, Brian, I'm not sure where that situation came up, that scenario that I read, but Luann raised that question. I'm not sure if that took place in Michigan, or maybe that was just sort of a hypothetical issue. But Bruce, one of the issues that some of us seem to have identified as a problem with the Green Party is that you talked about at the top of the show the differences between the two major parties and the Green Party. But one thing that seems to be similar at this point is that all of the parties seem to be candidate centered. That is that the
Absolutely.
job seems to be to identify individual candidates to run under the party banner, as opposed to a strategy in which organizations are centered. That the parties linked into social movement organizations, and that these organizations are encouraged to field candidates that have built-in accountability. So the shift is from a candidate-centered approach to a organizational-centered approach. Is that something that's viable? Is that something that's needed, or is that something that's just sort of theoretical?
It's you can call it theoretical, but it's where theory meets practice, where the rubber actually meets the road. Um, Political parties, well, politics is the business of our collective human affairs, and political parties are how politics get done. We have to ask ourselves: are we as a political party fighting for office? Are we fighting for to field candidates in elections, or are we fighting for power? Are we fighting for power? Okay, if we're going to be fighting for power, then we'll do elections, sure. But our first priority is to build a party and have a membership, and out of that, we'll organically grow candidates and candidacies. But if we're fighting for power, we've got to have a broader view of politics than just the next election. We've got
Okay.
to look at the institutions that keep society moving or not. Ultimately, we might want to think by the time we actually do grow greens into a mass party in one of these cities, to actually try our hands at some union organizing.
But check this out
You know,
before you go into that conversation about how we build in cities. Nathan Tyson is suggesting that the Green Party needs to leave its comfort zones of big cities like Atlanta, and in Georgia, for example, to build a stronger community presence within Georgia's agricultural sun belt, Southwest Georgia, and other places that are sort of identified as the red parts, the red sectors of the state. How do you respond to that?
you don't have to leave. You don't have to leave the places where you are. There are people in rural Georgia who can accept this message if it's brought to them. We've got some of them already on our mailing list, and we're already in conversation with some of them. There are issues that we can make common cause with many people in rural areas in Georgia, like for instance, the availability of broadband in rural areas.
Hmm.
Okay, broadband is completely unobtainable in lots of parts of rural Georgia. And what they don't know is that only an hour and 20 minutes north of where I'm sitting here in Atlanta, they've got the city of Chattanooga, which has its own free municipal broadband, which is the fastest and best in the state of Tennessee. And the one percenters who run the Tennessee legislature have clamped down laws that make it impossible for the Chattanooga Broadband Authority to sell broadband outside of its city limits, and have also made it impossible for local areas to do that, to duplicate that. But by the time the next session of the Georgia legislature rolls around, we will have advanced our talking with some of these rural folks, and we're going to have a rural broadband bill that we're going to be
That
looking for
sounds
sponsors
very
for.
interesting, Bruce. And I'm going to have to cut you off there because we have basically run out of time. And talking about Georgia, you have a meeting coming up in Georgia this weekend, correct?
Um, do we? No,
I'm
we
pretty
do
soon.
not.
You do that? Okay, that's my
No,
misinformation.
we do not. No,
Okay.
we've
Well,
got
Bruce, let
we've
me
got
let
our
me
annual
take.
meeting. Go ahead.
Uh-huh.
We've got our annual meeting the 17th of June, and we'll
Okay.
have 4 or 5 meetings in the month of May and toward the end of April
How
that
do
we can
people
let you
get in
know.
contact with you, Bruce, for a follow-up? We have more questions, but of course we couldn't get to most of them. How can people follow up with you to finish this
They
conversation or to
can
get more
they can go
information?
to the Facebook page of the Georgia Green Party and send a message there, and
Okay.
I'll get that.
Okay. Appreciate it, Joe. Appreciate it, Bruce. Very enlightening conversation. You know, it's the kind of conversation we need more than just basically 17 minutes. So we're gonna have to bring you back to finish up this conversation because we have a lot of work to do to get this Green Party ready to be competitive, and we have to because right now this is the only alternative in this country in terms of electoral, national, and local electoral politics. So thanks again, Bruce. Thank all of you for sticking with us. We're sorry we started a few minutes late, but join us again next week. We have Steve Grumbine from the Real Progressives. So join us in a I think, another very interesting conversation. Thank you and good night.